So, given that I have expressed so much importance in documenting, you might be asking yourself, what is documenting? Well, documenting is maintaining of documents, usually of an official nature, that serve for identification or to prove something or to prove an event. Why is it important? Well, in the security industry, as I mentioned, logbooks and reports may end up being evidence in an administrative case, a judicial proceeding, whether it be civil or criminal, or in a labor dispute. It is important to have reliable and historical record of an event for later viewing. This helps one corps be accountable to the client because they have documentation to prove to the client what has been done or what has occurred. It helps the guard to be accountable to the supervisor because the guard will have a documentation of what they did in the post, how they reacted to an event, to an incident, what happened in the post. They can prove it to the supervisor if they documented it well. It can also serve as evidence of proof that you complied with the different obligations of your post. Like, for example, you needed to take a walk of the premises. You wrote at what time you did it, at what time you came back. That is proof of what you did. The guard that's supposed to come after you comes in late, and you have to hand in the post later, but at a later hour. Well, you document it, and that way you can later go back on it and show the supervisor, show management, if there's an issue with that you fulfill your obligations. It is also important to assist in external and internal investigations. Sometimes the client or one corps needs to conduct an investigation regarding an incident, a person, an event. Well, they need good documentation to perform that investigation, because if there's no good documentation, they have to rely on the memory of the people, of the persons involved. And sometimes the investigations are done months later after the event, so the memory is not that clear. If it's written down when the memory was much more clear, that's a better, most significant piece of evidence than the mere memory of an event that happened months ago. How do you document and keep a good record? That is a very important part of the job. The first thing is for it to be simple and readable language. Why is that? Because you have to think of the documents, of the reports, not as something that you have to read, but as something that a third person, a third party, will have to read. Maybe it is the client, maybe it is the supervisor, maybe it is management. Someone else will have to read it, so it's important that it's simple and readable. And it's not done so that only you can read it or understand it. So you have to write clear, in a clear language, in a simple language that communicates what happened. Number two, it's important that you are true to the facts. This obviously, we don't have to explain why it's important for you to tell the truth. But you must consider that false information may derail an investigation. It may cover up an administrative flaw. It may cover a labor act or a tort act or a criminal offense. It may cover up something that was done wrong. And if you are not true to the facts, then it misleads. And false and misleading information, as we will later discuss, could have legal consequences. It could have legal consequences against yourself and against the company and against the client. And that is something that we do not want. Number three, include time and date. It is very important, whenever you document something, you start by writing the date and recording the time. You will thank me for that later. When you have to read back, when somebody has to read back and they ask when it was done, how are you sure when you did it, how are you sure at what time you signed? Well, You're sure because you wrote it. Then it's going to be your best defense. You wrote it down. At the moment, you recorded the date, you recorded the hour. So we know exactly where you were at that date and at that hour. That will come in very handy. That can come in very handy later on. Number 4, accuracy. It means that you have to have eye for the detail. You must be important that the message that you write, the content that you move forward, is accurate to what really happened. It explains the little things that make the event important or the incident important. So be accurate. That goes hand in hand with being true to the facts. Number 5, be concise. That means make sure that the information you write down is relevant, is pertinent. Sometimes when you do a story, there are different things that happen, but they're not pertinent to the job. They're not pertinent to the post. So try to be concise and record the relevant, important information. Of course, remember what you're thinking. How can you be accurate and true to the facts, but also be concise? Well, that is something you will develop as you document, as you make reports. And of course, if you're in doubt whether something is relevant or not, then it's probably relevant and you should write it down. And if you write more than you need to, your supervisor will in turn tell you, hey, you know, when you wrote these things, you could leave out this stuff, and then you learn. So you learn how to be concise. And you start learning what is important to inform. As a security guard, it's very important that you develop what type of information you have to communicate. And that is something that you will develop on the job. And a good test that you can do is, if I wanted to be informed of what happened, what details would I want to hear? What details are important to me, for me to know what happened from a third party? You answer yourself that, and that is exactly what you should communicate to a third person. What specifically do you have to document? Here are a few clues that may help you along the way. Number 1, anything your supervisor asks of you. If the supervisor says that you have to document something, document it. If he asks that you write the names of everyone that goes inside of the place, you have to write the names. So that one is simple. If the supervisor asks for it, you write it down. Number 2, what time you arrive for the post, what time you receive the post, and what time you pass on when you leave the post. That is very important, because then nobody can say that you were there at a time that you were not. You check in and you check out. That's the second most important thing. Number 3, the tasks that you perform. If your job needs you to do certain things, for example, go out on a walk of the premises, make sure that the perimeter is clear. If the job requires that you write something down every hour, so of that type of things, it is important that you perform them, that you do everything that you do, you write it down. If it's something that you have to do, that's the type of thing that you have to write down, that you did it. That way, that can later serve as a logbook of what you did on the post. That can help your supervisor, the client, or one corps in a multiple of different ways. Also, you must record the incidents that occur during your position, during your post. What incidents am I talking about? Well, ordinary happenings that are relevant to the post and the duties at the post. You also must record any unusual or extraordinary incidents. That means, if it happens at your post, if it's something that ordinarily does not happen at your post, or is it something that you think that your employer would like to know that it happens at the post, or that the client would like to know, you must write it down. It's important that you understand that documenting something does not exempt you from personally notifying others, like your supervisor, at the post when a situation dictates that you notify it. That means that if it's something very important that your supervisor should know, it's not, you not only should document it, but you should also make sure that your supervisor finds out. Because sometimes it's not only important to pass on information, it's important to pass on information at the right time. If the information comes in late, after the fact, then it wasn't valuable. So remember, you document everything, but if something needs to be informed in a rush, you inform it in a rush. I have spoken to you different ways that you can be legally responsible for that. The company can be legally responsible. So I'm going to give you a few examples. They're not the only examples, but a few of them of laws and regulations that come into play during your job, during your post, regarding the documenting, regarding the compliance of a contract. The first thing is what are called the non-contractual responsibilities, damages. In English they call it torts, tort law. That means that there are obligations that are contracted, well, those are the obligations within the contract, but there are also obligations that are born from your actions or your omissions. For example, if you let an armed person go by your post, he walks in front of you, you know he's armed, you do not stop him, and you do not tell anybody, and that person goes and causes a lot of damages, and life is lost, you will be liable for that. There's no contract written, but you're liable because at the moment you accepted the post, you accepted some responsibilities. By you not complying with those obligations or responsibilities, damages were caused. And the tricky thing about that is that you're not only responsible yourself, and that includes you're responsible with all your property. You can lose everything because depending on the damages. If the damages are big, then your loss will also be big. But you're not the only one who's liable. There's also responsibility for your employer. So the employer is responsible for every little thing you do or don't do. If your actions or omissions cause damages, your employer will also have to pay for it. So it's important that you think about this, because you're not only protecting yourself, again, you're also protecting the employer. So those obligations, those are what most commonly in Puerto Rico they call tort law, which is when you're responsible for an action or omission that causes damages or loss. As you know, there are also laws that come into play in the security industry that are part of the penal code that can have criminal implications. Some of the implications of things we've mentioned today are, for example, Article 169 of the Puerto Rico Penal Code, which is the concealment of a crime. Like we mentioned earlier, if you conceal, if you do not inform that somebody is committing a crime, you may become also implicit in that crime. You may be a conspirator after the fact, and you may be responsible in a criminal way, in a criminal court of law, to those obligations that, to those crimes that you let happen or that you knew and didn't do anything. There is also one regarding destruction of evidence, which is Article 174 of the Penal Code. As we mentioned earlier, the documents that you prepare, the reports, they may be used later on in a civil case, in an administrative case, or in a penal case, a criminal case. So if you destroy evidence, that also can lead to a commission of the crime. That also can be a crime in itself, to destroy evidence. For example, once you know an investigation begins, if you destroy something, you may be committing a crime by throwing something in the trash. Doing a simple act like that could have criminal implications and could lead to criminal proceeding. Preparing false writing, preparing false documents. If you make a false report, if you know something didn't happen, but you say that it did, that also can become evidence in a court of law. And that also can become evidence in an investigation. And if you did purposely do a write false information, so to mislead an investigation or to mislead a civil or criminal proceeding, that also can be a violation of law. Presentation of false writings. That one is tied down to the one we just mentioned. If you present documents that you know are false, and you present them in an official matter, in a court matter, in an investigation, you also may be committing a crime. You may be in violation of law. Not only civil responsibility, but criminal responsibility. And those are just a few. There are, of course, all different laws that apply, that may apply. For example, insurance laws. There are a lot of insurance rules that insurance laws that can be violated if you, for example, write a report that will be used as an insurance investigation to pay or not pay a claim. If you write false information so that insurance has to pay, that can also lead to a violation of law. Those are just a few of the different aspects that you may be liable for, or that you may be prosecuted for, or that one corpse could be liable for, or one corpse could be prosecuted for the actions that you do. So it's important that, and I don't mention all these different laws to scare you or to get you to worry. I do it so that you know the seriousness of the security industry. This is a very formal and very high stakes occupation for yourself and for others. So that is the seriousness that you must take when you do your job, when you perform your duties. And that is why we do the seminars, so that you are prepared when you go around the field, when you present one corpse, that you are prepared to represent yourself and the company and to act in accordance to the law. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the seminar.